before. Welcome, Rob Brown here, and we are in the 7th of a number of panels we're doing with the heads of global accounting alliances, networks, associations, communities, institutes, and we've got 4 terrific guests today. We're going to debate some interesting topics of the interesting times that we are in for the accounting profession. So I'm just going to invite the guests to introduce themselves with a little bit of background and who they represent and the kind of firms that are in their empire, and then we'll kick off with our questions for today. So Martin, can I invite you to do a little introduction first?
Certainly, thank you, Rob. I'm Martin Bissett, owner of the Bissett Group, which is an umbrella brand for 5 different organisations that serve the accounting profession and have done for the last 22 years overall. And they include my UK community of accountants known as the Upper Spiral Professionals, and the US version of the same known as Advisor Plus. So whether it's speaker, mentor, coach, consultant, author, or just overall business owner, my work is entirely in the accounting profession.
Thank you, Martin. Tim Morris, welcome from BKR. Give us a little introduction.
Thank you very much, Rob. Tim Morris here. I'm the Executive Director, Europe, Middle East and Africa for BKR International. We are an international accountancy association, 30 years old, 160 members in 80 countries around the world, and I look after 62 of them in Europe. All our members are totally independent members of the association.
And you've been doing that for how long, Tim?
5 years.
Okay. But you've been in the game a little bit longer.
I've been around for a long, long time, as you can tell.
I've got a few myself. Okay, well, welcome. Derek Smith, welcome to the panel. Please give us a little introduction.
Right. It's not 5 years, it's 5 months or less than that I took over with a couple of others, the CharterGroup, which is a UK-based alliance of essentially small and medium-sized firms where our role is to try and help them sustain them, help them grow. In terms of my background, I'm an accountant by background, qualified sometime between the wars, it feels like now, with Coopers in London, moved from there to what was Neville Russell to what is now Mazars, became their UK managing partner, which was a role I had for about 10 years before, I took them through the Mazars merger and so on to form the largest global firm at that time, and I think probably still, because it was a total equity-based environment. Prior to that, I was involved with Nexia, which was again an international alliance of firms, but that was a network rather than equity-based. My claim to fame, if I have one, is that most of the problems confronting managing partners I've made a mistake on at some stage, so can hopefully help them to learn from that experience.
That's very honest. Thank you, Derek. Appreciate that. Anton, welcome to the panel. Please give us a little introduction.
Thanks, Rob. And I am Anton Colella. I'm the global CEO of Global, what was formerly known as Moore Stevens. We are a global accountancy professional services network, revenues of over 3 billion, 250 firms in 110 countries. And before that, I'm here on the job for 2 years. Before that, I was the CEO of the Institute of Chartered Accountants Scotland.
Welcome, welcome. A fine pedigree of our panelists here. And it is great that we have you representing the accounting profession. There's so much going on at the moment. You have a unique perspective in your leadership role. So let's kick off with the first question. And it sounds a bit negative to start with. You're going to say that your firms are coping really well, the opportunities are out there, and everything is going great for all the firms in your empire. But let's start with mistakes, because firms have coped well generally. But what have accounting firms got wrong in this time? And Tim, I'm going to start with you on this one. What mistakes have you seen being made that other firms could perhaps learn from? Not necessarily in your network, but generally.
Well, obviously in the association, members being totally independent aren't very good at sharing their mistakes necessarily. But I think one of the common threads has been if you have not been looking forward in your day-to-day business and are happy with where you are, you were caught wrong-footed with the current crisis. If, on the other hand, and I'm sure we'll come on to it, you've been thinking ahead, you've got a realistic strategy, you have contingency plans in place, you've invested in IT, and prior to the crisis, I mean, remote working, artificial intelligence, IT, etc., were all big hot issues. And those member firms that have grasped that and gone forward have had less of a painful transition to the crisis and are better placed to exit from it.
Yeah, Anton, what would you add to that?
Again, I probably wouldn't use the term mistakes, but I understand the purpose in it. I mean, mistakes is something I make every day of the week anyway, regardless of a crisis. I think the phrase I would probably use is tests, because I think the thing that happens during a crisis, it tests who you are. It tests the resilience of your business model, your cash flow, but you know what it really tests in a professional services network? The value you give to your member firms. Because when discretionary spend starts to get cut and firms are protecting their cash, they will ask the question, I would expect them to ask the question, why am I spending this money? Particularly if the timing is related to a dues or subscription invoice. Why am I here? What am I getting from it? So what it does is it tests the value that you've been given, but also, most significantly, tests the quality of relationships that exist within the network. Because at times like this, particularly among managing partners, do you know what they want? Companionship. A lonely place. You are having to negotiate a crisis, to have a peer group, a close peer group of where there's a level of both companionship but intimacy and openness. It is absolutely invaluable. So the crisis tests all of that. Fortunately, we've not been found wanting. But I was asking the question straight away, how good have we been? How good are we just now?
Yeah, we will pick up on some of those points, but they're excellent. And Martin, some firms have been exposed, haven't they? And this has been a test of their leadership, their character, their very business structure.
And found wanting as well, yeah. So let's look at a macro level, first of all. In the UK, I know I can name 2 firms who have gone bust in this period. One an award-winning firm, which shows that mistakes were not only widespread, but also historic. And they paid the ultimate price. The other thing that I think is the most commonly held issue, mistake, faux pas, misstep, is the shutting up of shop from a communications perspective, where there are a number of firms who have failed to talk to their clients. They've certainly stopped talking to their prospects. And the most acute example of this that I saw was a firm's social media feed being filled with questions from clients who could not reach them any other way, and the firm in question not responding to these comments on the social media feed, and a competing firm who was keeping an eye on their competitors' social media feed answered the questions for them. So that's a competing firm answering another firm's client's questions publicly on that first firm's social media feed. And of course, as you can imagine, at the end of that story, that led to those clients defecting because they got the help from the competing firm when they needed it. That's not isolated. And so there are a number of things that have gone right and that practice has done extremely well. Remote working being one of them, and turning firefighting into proactive cuddling being another. But there have also been a number of missteps, and failing to respond to clients or prospects would be right up there on my list.
Yeah, very good. Derek, some firms have been exposed. They've put a few feet wrong. What stands out for you in what they could have done a bit better?
Yeah, I think for most, I think they've actually done very well.
Yeah.
And I would echo sort of Anton's comments that it's not so much mistakes. The only thing I would say is I think it's not only testing the value they give, but it's testing the values which they have as a firm on which they use in their relationships with their clients. Because those who have a powerful value set, I think have done incredibly well. I think there's been some, if you like, some tactical errors, you know, when furloughing, which hasn't been used by many, but when it was first came in, people seemed to think that giving people 100% was the thing to do, which in fact, if you stand back from it, is probably the worst thing you can do, because what you're saying to the person in the office still is, the guy who used to sit next to you is now getting 100% for doing nothing. whereas you're still busting a gut. But I think generally they've performed very well. Those who were technology savvy, and I think most are or have had to be, have done well. I think it's exposed some of the low-cost providers, and I think, you know, that's given opportunities because they can't deal with it. And I think it's given some very real challenges around distance leadership, which is very different for most, because for many firms, you actually built the relationship with your team by walking the floor, by going to see them, by chatting to them and so on. And I think that has been a challenge for some. Yeah. Some, I think, have addressed it in very, very novel ways. I mean, my favorite on that, where the firm used to have an event on a Friday evening where they would go out as a team and have a glass of wine or whatever. They now run their online pub called the Vat and Fiddle, where they all have a drink at 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon and say hello to everybody. But they've had to restructure in certain ways, but generally I think they've coped incredibly well. Mm.
Yeah, and by asking the question, we're not saying that they haven't, but some firms have been exposed. And as Anton said, that was the preface of the question. Anything to add there, gentlemen, that's come up after you did your piece before we move on? Super. So that segues nicely into how firms have made decisions and strategies. And some key projects have been accelerated through this. The COVID-19 has made them pivot faster and be more agile. Some decisions have been delayed and pushed back. So, Anton, I'll start with you on this one. Have you seen firms executing better and faster as a result of this uncertainty, or backing off and waiting and seeing like they kind of did with Brexit?
I think every firm has tested their investment strategy. What can they delay? What can they not delay? But what it has done is, for every firm, the biggest asset on its balance sheet is its people. And what has happened in many firms is they've optimized the return on their people, where the whole shape of how people use their time has been turned upside down. What it has allowed is the opportunity to initiate developments, fresh developments, and actually execute them much quicker. So I see a lot of firms quickly switch to the future by engaging with their people, deploying with their people, and delegating tasks to them in a way that making change happen much quicker. We've seen things happen in 2 weeks that we were planning over a year.
Yeah.
Because there was a will, there was a determination, and we've used the people well. Mm-hmm. So in a sense, we are looking at all our firms, and we're seeing all over the world actually building momentum coming out of the crisis with new services, new initiatives, reconfigured organization, redeployment of staff, even movement of staff around an organization. One of the things that's done for managing partners is times of crisis, your leaders come to the fore. And you're starting to see organizations say, we have some new leaders identified that we can redeploy to lead things, to allow the organization and the firm to really move forward in some new areas.
Yeah.
And all of this, when you get the people bit right and the people are supported and looked after, the strategy and the principal strategy in all of this is looking after your clients. There's a level of intimacy developing with the relationship with clients that they never had the time to develop before, which I really believe augurs well for the future and will develop a long-term loyalty that they've not seen before.
It's a very good point. Tim, we had Derek talking about distance leadership there. What have you seen in your association with firms in the way they've accelerated or slowed down on their decision-making with the leadership?
Well, in many ways, I'd just like to echo what Anton's just said. I mean, everything Anton said there chimes with what I've been getting back. And certainly from an international perspective, it's not just been Europe. In some of the countries that have not been best placed to deal with the crisis, our firms there have reacted strongly and realised that they're going to have to do business differently. And in some of these countries, and here I'm thinking of West Africa, where the infrastructure has not been great, and the ability of the support from governments is not as well developed as it is in Europe, for example. Our member firms there have really sort of taken it and realised they've got to do things differently. And culturally, I think that's a much bigger ask than it has been in Western Europe, where working from home has become quite the norm in a lot of places. But certainly, they seem to have embraced it. There's a lot of remote learning going on amongst the internally amongst the staff, and also that ability to reach out and grasp clients and looking after your clients, because certainly at the moment where you're looking ahead and getting new clients sort of cold is going to be quite challenging. So a lot of new clients that member firms are looking at and are referrals from existing clients. So by looking after your existing clients well, our member firms that have done that, which seems to be certainly the majority, the ones I've talked to have been doing that. That's how you're looking after your marketing as well as servicing your existing clients. And so it's payback. What you put in is what you get out of it. It's a phrase I like to use. Deserve.
Sure.
And seeing that, it's been very encouraging.
We are going to touch on growth and recovery and how firms replace those depleted revenues. But Derek, Anton mentioned the word momentum. Do you feel there's been a step change in the agility of firms that's been brought on by COVID-19?
Yes, and I would echo the comments of the previous folk. I think well, there has been less kicking the can down the road on difficult decisions than one has seen in the past. And one has also seen a greater acceptance that you have structures where management decisions are made. There are a number of the firms where I'm involved with, the partners actually meet more regularly than ever they have, only on Zoom or Team in the morning, but stuff gets done. And I think the other part that's come with it is an increased momentum in terms of the flexibility of decision, where I think a number of firms have traditionally gone for almost either or strategies when it's got to be both and. I mean, if you look at it in very crude terms, if you had a boutique firm at the moment that specialises in corporate finance, you might as well take the brass plate down now. If you're a specialist in IP or insolvency, things are probably going to look quite attractive in the short term. So I think the boutiques will find problems on strategies, but generally I think people have adjusted very quickly. They've realised that the sort of management structures they've had that are very hierarchical traditionally can be flattened in lots of ways, and that you can empower lots of your people. I mean, so many firms of any size have this expression of a manager, and in so many firms all they manage is a file. They don't manage people, which, as Anton said, they're the most important thing to manage.
Yeah.
And so you've seen that increased momentum, and I think you've also seen people they're delegating objective more than just delegating task.
Sure.
They're saying to people, can you sort this out, rather than do this little bit, come back to me, report back, and I'll tell you what else to do. And I'm seeing a lot of, if you like, mid-tier folk who are really coming out of this with huge confidence and huge reliability looking forward.
Yeah. Martin, have you seen a lot of agility in decision making, or have firms just backed off making big decisions?
It's interesting. To pick up on Derek's point about boutique firms, corporate finance take the plate down. IP might be looking rosy now. One thing that I hadn't taken into consideration was firms who used outsourcing predominantly in the production of compliance work, because lockdown in India was much tougher than it was here. And as such, there was no contingency for what's happened when the outsourcers weren't around, which has left a number of firms exposed on that basis, which is one thing I must admit I hadn't factored into my thinking. Generally, I've seen agility and agility with consequence. I think probably the biggest win for the profession, speaking generally rather than individually, is that 35 years have talked about we should move to advisory came true. And finally, firms did, but not because they were proactive, because the global pandemic made it so, because the clients beat down the door asking for the support. It was still a reactive measure. and a reactive behavior. But what the acid test now is what's going to happen when the clients stop proactively asking them to help beyond compliance. Will the firms take the initiative to educate prospects and clients alike on the full level of support, growth, and basic work that can be done to make a business prosper? So for me, that's a big win. Working from home was another, of course, big win. It turned a 10-hour office day into a 3.5, 4-hour working from home day with the same or better level of productivity. The question mark that raises now is, where were we billing all the time? Which client was paying for that? You know, for the in the office chats that were taking up the time. And that, I think, will throw a question on time-based billing going forward as an appropriate measure of outputs. So I think that this is a wonderful time for the profession. I have seen decision-making sped up out of necessity, shows what we can do when we need to, shows just how powerful and profound an impact we can have in business owners' lives when we want to, when it's required. And I think now we're going to see what happens now. Do we revert to type as people come back into the offices and we adopt perhaps a more relaxed approach? Or will we now take that opportunity to really go forward and realize the full potential of the firms, clients, and the needs within them? That, for me, is the big one.
And it's a lovely segue, because we're going to talk about the reintegration now. Working from home has generally been well received. Accounting firms pivoted well into that. But we've got disparate working now. So how are firms going to deal with this as the social distancing and the lockdown eases and we bring them back in? Tim, let's start with you on this one. Do you think we're going to go back to the old ways, or there's going to be some kind of new normal in the way firms work and set up their offices?
It's interesting you use the phrase new normal. All the members I talked to getting ready for this, all of them in different ways said there isn't going to be no normal. It's going to be new normal. And high on that from a staff perspective, with this realization that working from home is a reality and can offer huge great advantages, especially for our members living in places like, working in places like London or New York, Paris, where the floor plate costs are astronomical. And suddenly you can look at how much space do I need? Do I need to sign a contract for a bigger premises, or can I actually use my current premises in a more intelligent way by allowing staff and encouraging staff to work at home? But I think it's going to be a balancing act, and that's where leadership really comes in, because I think there's got to be some proactive leadership that actually describe or sets out the rules for that firm, how they are going to work, and what's going to be best for them. That's going to be different depending on your environment and where you are. But I think it offers tremendous opportunities for members, throughout the world, regardless of their situation. There's going to be lots there that they can use and take forward to their advantage.
Derek, we've got into a groove, haven't we, with working from distance? You look very comfortable there at home. Are we going to go back to the long commutes and the big expensive offices, or what's going to change?
I think, as Tim has said, it'll be different for different people. I mean, if you look at the very large firms, they have not worked from home, but they haven't been office-based. They've got a core of work that is audit, which is done off-site. Yeah. And I think audit's going to be a real challenge as to what happens, because you cannot audit working from home. That's it. I mean, there's no question, you just cannot do it. And there are huge GDPR implications, huge PI issues around the audit portfolio if that's what you try and do.
Right.
But I think for some of the firms where a lot of their work, excuse me, let's kill that. That's not supposed to happen.
That's
okay. A lot of their work is done sort of in the office. I think some of them will go for smaller sites, and I think you may see a new model in terms of flexible hour working, mummy tracking, all sorts of things can come from that. I think the other point, and it's in part to disagree slightly with Martin on the advisory, because I think what this has shown is that if you just put all your eggs in the basket of advisory at the moment, you've got problems. Compliance is a good earner. and if you can rebase the cost, which they're doing through home working, it's very attractive. And I think it will also, if you get the relationship right, will see off the low-cost providers.
Mm-hmm. Martin, let's bring you in on that point,
Yeah.
and the working from home generally, the new normal. What do you have to say?
Well, just going on to Derek's point there, I think he's right. Compliance is a good earner if your pricing is in order.
Yeah.
You know, for a lot of firms, pricing isn't in order and people collapse on price. So that's swinging around about as well. We had our group USP report on the return to work scenario on Tuesday in our group meeting there. And almost all firms there are bringing their teams back in from Monday onwards. And there seems to be 3 different approaches being adopted. One is the rotational approach, having sort of a team 1, team 2, team 3. In week 1 of the month, team 1 is in, 2 and 3 are at home. In week 2 of the month, 2 is in, 1 and 3 at home, and so on and so forth. So a rotational structure so that social distancing can be practiced within the existing office structure, although we have government indications now that we might even be relaxing the 2-meter rule. So that's the first thing I've seen. The second thing I've seen is the installation of screens, the ones that we see in the supermarkets between checkout and customer. I've seen quite a few firms, significantly in central London as well, employ health and safety consultants to give advice on how they should return to work. And these screens have been put up, not just at the sides of desks, but also at the front of them, so that the work team can still speak to each other, but through screens. Whether that's a temporary measure, you would assume that's a temporary measure, not a permanent measure, but that has been implemented and decisions have been taken to install that. And the other thing I've seen is the airline approach, or the proposed airline approach, where airlines have suggested that they would sell the window and aisle seats and leave the middle seat free. I'm not sure that's actually happened, but I see firms adopting that approach as well, where they've got teams fairly close together, but just spreading out a wee bit more and putting middle seats as clear to practice social distancing there. Spoke to the members about why they were bringing the team back and why working from home was not going to be the new norm. And an interesting point was raised about herd mentality. That people, this was a generalization, but that people who perhaps live with their partner or by themselves were quite happy to continue working from home and had no requirement, especially if there's a commute involved, to come back into the office. However, those with childcare issues and pressures were actually craving adult company again and herd mentality again, and were actively asking the partners to be brought back into the office so that they could resume a routine, so that they could get back to something that felt like normal. So it's interesting that there's those 2 camps there. So I think we will see a hybrid solution now going forward, where we know technology can support working from home. Derek's point on tracking, I think, is spot on. That's a big issue. But certainly not all staff will be returning to the office when this is all over, for sure.
Yeah. Anton, what sense do you get from your members of what back to work looks like?
So one of the things that's happened through the crisis, which I think in time some will look back as a defining moment, has been the decoupling of our people from our working structures. And I know that's been untidy, it's been messy, but what it has brought to the fore is our workforce is not homogenous. We know that, it's stating the obvious. But also they work differently, they thrive differently, they flourish differently, they operate differently, they're successful differently. And what we're seeing now, and I think it will be too easy just to recouple again with whatever engineering we have to do to the office environments, etc. I think the more mature and ambitious and forward-looking organizations will say, okay, what are we learning about our people here? What are we learning about what makes them fulfilled in their work? What are we learning about high performance in this environment? And I think it would be folly just to re-engineer again, recouple again, as though that is the new normal. For me, the new normal will be, how do people work well? And how do we maximize the potential of our people? And but the reality is we cannot separate their professional and personal lives. I mean, businesses that have tried to do that for a long time have underestimated the impact that the domestic has on the professional. Here we have an opportunity to help align it. Now, everybody will be different. As Martin says, they'll have different needs, circumstances. But what it will require, if this is to work, is managers will have to spend more time understanding their people, their needs, their wants, their potential, how they operate well. And that might say, oh no, we don't have time to do that. If they invest the time in that, I really believe the loyalty of the workforce and the performance of the workforce will increase dramatically. And I think it will have a huge effect on their ability to operate in the way they service their clients.
Mm.
I think it's also worth, if I can just say, building on that point, it's also a great opportunity for firms being able to look at a much larger pool of expertise. If you think that at the moment, if you're in Paris and you want to hire a new transport pricing manager, director, whatever, the pool in Paris is fairly small. But if you know that people are willing to work from home, you can look at Amsterdam, you can look at Bonn, you can look at Lyon. And people are willing and more open now, I think, to working remotely. And it may be you come into the office once every couple of months, you come in for an induction, get into the firm's ethos and all the rest of it. But it really gives you, as a manager, as a partner, much greater flexibility if you're willing to embrace it.
Sure. You do wonder what would happen if the pandemic would have occurred 10, 15 years ago, where we didn't have the capacity to work from home. We didn't have things like Zoom. We couldn't guarantee the cybersec and everything else. But it seems like now we've broken the what's the word I'm looking for? The resistance to it, and people think now it can be done. So yeah, interesting what that looks like. Let's pivot, gentlemen, if we can, to growth and recovery. We know that by and large firms have lost some clients, had depleted pipelines. There's a few firms that may have benefited and even got more revenue in during this time. But I'm just interested in your take, and I'll start with you on this one, Derek, on how firms are set up to recover from this, get the right blend of compliance and advisory. They're going to let go of weaker clients. How important is it to hold on to the good clients? What is your prognosis for recovery and growth?
Most of those that I'm involved in at the moment see there still a massive opportunity unless they are into particular niches. I mean, there's one particular firm I deal with who specialise in trunk, which is the tipping thing for anybody in hospitality. Well, needless to say, they do not have a happy future to look at the moment. But for many, what they're doing is finding that smaller firms are incapable of servicing appropriately, and they're winning more work and more clients, and they're getting a better reputation from it. I think one of the challenges around it, and we've touched on it, we didn't mention it on strategies particularly, but I think there are some who will find things like the outsourcing issue is a real issue for them as to whether or not they can continue to do work there. You've also got a change, I think, in the market on potential growth, where one of the drivers has been the demography of the profession, where I think you're going to have a lot of people who can no longer exit, a lot of people who are based on goodwill models that won't work anymore because capital values have dropped dramatically. And that may mean that you have a leadership that becomes more conservative rather than being on a growth projection. And I honestly don't know what's going to happen on that. Well, I don't think anybody does. But the other thing is, I think some of the potential growth or some of the market was being driven by, if you like, equity-based third-party firms who relied entirely upon outsourcing product. They are not going to be in the market anymore. And I think there's going to be a lot of firms that are looking to come out and to join up with other people. So I think there may be, if you like, some organic growth coming from firms who are presently with, if you like, equity-based firms, when those firms I'm not sure are going to be around.
Sure.
So it's a very hard one to call, to be honest, but most of the folk I'm dealing with are feeling reasonably bullish on it because at the moment they're incredibly busy and they're winning work.
Yeah. Martin, you talk a lot about business development in your books and talks, but Derek's hinting at some M&A activity to get firms out of this. How equipped do you feel firms are to take advantage of the opportunities here? Do they have the skills to bring in business remotely, or is it going to be more M&A stuff for you?
Well, two very distinct questions there, Rob. So first of all, on M&A, I'm with Derek completely. And what I love about M&A is that it springs out new small firms with new visions after the non-compete expires, and allows, therefore, some new blood and some new leadership to come into the profession. So yes, I think there's certain firms who've been looking at the M&A market from September onwards, right from when this started. I haven't seen a big amount of client loss. I can't point you towards large client loss for the firms that I speak to, both here and overseas. I can, however, point to an amount of client acquisition. Anton mentioned the word intimacy, and what intimacy has done, although it was forced intimacy, intimacy has accelerated referral. And as such, our group reported on over 200 separate client wins since March 23rd to whenever they reported. I think it was the end of May that we were reporting there, Tuesday. I think it was, so yes, end of May. And so we do see very clear, very demonstrable client wins because they have got close to clients, because other firms have not serviced, and so on. Are they then well equipped to capitalize going forward? Has the profession started teaching sales? Have partners suddenly become more adept at negotiation, pricing, objection handling, and closing? No. So from a referral point of view, sure. I think we'll see, as the closer they get to the clients and existing clients, bring referral opportunities out, and non-billable time is spent on that, then absolutely. I think we see a very bright outlook. Proactive winning of work, I think, is a different subject altogether. And they're, at this moment in time, as it was, about as equipped to handle proactive sales as I am to handle accountancy.
Anton, I'm interested in your take on this. We're clearly not going to be shaking hands and going to networking events in the next 6 months or so. So bringing in new business, replacing depleted pipelines and revenues. What's your take on the growth outlook?
I mean, obviously, first thing is the loyalty to existing clients. You care for them, you love them, you look after them. They're never going anywhere else. And the profile of the work they give may change, but eventually that will recover. So I think the existing market is still strong, and from within that. But let's be absolutely clear. We talk a lot about word of mouth and the benefit of a good reputation and the quality of service. Now, more than ever, where you're unable to impress personally, the word of mouth of a well-served client who's been loved and cared for and looked after is absolutely invaluable. We're seeing this all over the globe, where we have spent the last couple of years really energizing our approach to client care. The fruitfulness of this is coming through with loyalty, what they're telling their friends, so to speak. And I also think how we are communicating who we are, whether in social media or whatever, not selling, but our identity, our purpose, our values, our sense of humanity at this time of suffering for human beings, I think again has drawn attraction and interest and curiosity from potential clients. And I'll be honest with you, I have a great sense of optimism for the future. Societally, we've got pain to come, and it will be difficult recovering, and there'll be many experiencing pain. But for our firms, we have great hope and optimism. Some of our advisory and consulting work has dropped like a stone. And that's what Derek was saying earlier on. Our compliance, traditional work that we thought we need to break out of to really develop has actually been the thing that's kept our businesses afloat. But in time, the other will come back. And I think what we have just now is, where there's time, I love watching advisory and consulting teams thinking, how do we change? What do we do in the future? What new service lines can we develop? And I think if the relationship with the client is good, watch the rest come.
Yeah. And Tim, it does seem, doesn't it, that whatever the question, accountants have the answer. If SMEs are not doing well, accountants are the trusted advisor. And if they are doing well, accountants can fill that gap. So are you as optimistic for growth and recovery as everyone else?
Well, I certainly am, and the reason I am is that's what my members are telling me. All of them seem very positive. They know there are going to be hard times, but one of the great things about this profession is that there's always a requirement for that, and the way it develops really works to our advantage. And if you're able to sit back and look at what's going on, you've realized that looking after your existing clients is a great way of effectively letting them do your marketing for you. And then seeing what service lines are suitable, what can be developed. And I do think this is a great time for member firms to be sitting down, scratching their heads, and making use of this time where people are willing to, and there's lots of energy about, to look at where they're going to take their firms in the future. I'm very optimistic.
Any final thoughts to add on that, gents, before we start summing up?
It's a general comment, which I hope is not a digression, but we used to run in my previous firm, we used to have an annual event for our London team, which was quite glitzy. And I can always remember we had a client, I'm being a bit indiscreet, no, his name was Wayne Hemingway, who ran Red or Dead, who was a bit of a character. We'd won him from a Big Four firm. He used to arrive and call us the Suits. I mean, that was his general descriptive for us. But I can always remember him saying what he liked about our firm was we phoned him when there wasn't a problem, where he was used to his accountants only contacting him when something was wrong. And he said, that's what distinguishes you from the rest of the market. And I think that's what's happening during this particular pandemic, that clients are getting a lot more contact from their accountants. They're seeing them on Zoom, they're seeing them on Teams, they're getting phone calls. And that's how you build the relationship. I mean, obviously face-to-face is stronger, but to get a phone call every week or whatever is great.
Yeah, and it's the intimacy that Anton was talking about, isn't it? Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, summing up then, gentlemen, and Anton, I'll come to you first on this one. And crystal ball time. Unless we get a vaccine quickly, we're still going to be in lockdown, social distancing for some time. There's no doubt there's an economic slowdown and recession coming up. We've all spoke quite bullishly about the prospects for the accounting profession, but we know there's going to be tax bills need paying, loans need repaying. Talk to us, Anton, about what you think the rest of 2020 holds, and particularly 2021 for your accounting firm members.
Again, as I said earlier on, I've got great hope, optimism. This is not something superficial. I mean, part of this is rooted in our sense of how human beings respond to crisis. When I used the word suffering earlier, this has been a time of suffering, personal, societal, business. Some of us respond well to suffering and pain, others don't. And the testing of the resilience of an organization, its optimism, its ability to care for its people, to give a message of hope and potential will come through. Those that are unable to do that, some of them may not survive. But I really believe that we have an opportunity here, an undesired opportunity, but it has come our way as a society and as a business community, as a network, that we have an opportunity to press reset on the way we've done things, our value-based, stand for, the way we lead, how we lead. And I have great optimism that our human resilience and determination will come through here in ways that the crisis may not, we may not have been able to do without that situation. But one thing I would say just now, one of the things that is characterized in our own network is how the young have responded, the young leaders have stood up.
Okay.
I really believe that many of our future managing partners and leaders in the network will point to 2020 and 2021 as the time that they grew. They learned about leadership. They learned what it is about being a human being, a human leader, a good leader of teams, that I really believe will define them for the future. All our future leaders, we're seeing them now starting to reveal themselves.
That's interesting. Tim, Anton's talking about something of a watershed moment we have here. What's your prognosis for the rest of the year in 2021?
Well, I think this is so unusual. It's certainly a time, it's a great time to look ahead. If you've weathered the storm,
Yeah.
Yeah, as I said earlier, I think it's a great time to just spend a few moments thinking your business through, where you want it to go, where the opportunities are, identifying those, keying your people up, resetting them for the new norm. And whilst it will be painful, and certainly for a lot of our clients, I think it'll be painful, yeah, especially if you work in the hospitality business. I do think that in the longer term, there are lots of possibilities out there. And yeah, I think that's one of the great advantages about being in this industry. Every needs an accountant.
Derek Smith, what's your crystal ball showing up for you for the rest of the year and 2021 for accountants?
Well, I'd echo the comments that have been made. I think somebody said recently the tectonic plates are shifting, and I think that's a great descriptive as to where the world has moved. And I think there are people who are suffering. There are people who are being really challenged. Accountants generally are in a bit of a bubble. We don't face those sort of issues. I mean, I just cannot imagine being in lockdown with 4 young kids in the house, 18 dogs or whatever, and all the noise on the planet. I mean, I am very privileged here, but I'm, it's going to be tough, but I've still got this view that if you stick to your values, you get there.
Yeah.
And it's all about being transparent and consistent, trying to do the right thing, even though you know you're going to get it wrong, being kind to people, and trying to lead from the front. And if you do those things, I think there's quite a rosy future, but it's not going to be as easy for all of us.
Yeah. Martin, are you a futurist?
Oh.
What do you sense is coming up?
Opportunity, Rob. I think there's a tremendous opportunity, and one of the most attractive or exciting opportunities that we've got now is to bring financial literacy to especially SMEs more than ever. The number of businesses that I speak to personally who regard a bounce back loan as free money. They haven't understood it as a debt. They don't understand that debt increases by 2.5% after the payment holiday is over. It's a bailout. Free money. Isn't everything all right now that we've got this free money that's arrived? And this whole idea of having to pay it back at some point and pay it back with interest, albeit low interest, is just no. I can't see that from where my head is in the sand. And we've got a lot of that. We've seen how many businesses, I should say, have operated without emergency preparedness plans. How many businesses have operated without cash reserves, hence a bounce back loan being required in the first place, and so on and so on and so on and so on. And one of the most noble iterations of accountancy for me is the ability to bring financial literacy to business owners so that they're in control of their futures, so that they understand and make better decisions about their businesses. And now they're asking for that. Now they're actually proactively saying, can you help us with that? And that's a wonderful opportunity for firms everywhere to both make money bluntly and selfishly, but also to create tremendous loyalty and value, the like of which they haven't done before. And for those firms, those accounting firms who helped, to be written into the strategic plans of those businesses for years to come.
This has been excellent, gentlemen. I'm going to ask you to just contribute some closing remarks and words of encouragement for the accountants listening, the accounting leaders, managing partners watching this back. What words of encouragement or advice would you give to them in terms of taking advantage of the watershed that we talked about, the opportunities? And Tim, I'm going to come to you first on this one. So just some closing words of advice or encouragement for the accounting leaders and the younger generation, really, that Anton spoke about as well. They're looking at this with interest in how they're being led in their firm. So what would you say to those watching and listening?
Well, I go back to the points I made earlier. I think it's a great time to sit back, look at your business, look at what's happening out there, grasping the opportunities, grasping them and taking them forward. You've got to be positive about it. And now's a great time to be deciding where you want to go.
And if not now, then when, right, Tim?
Yeah, exactly.
You won't
Yeah.
get
In the normal times, we're all far too busy to actually find the time to decide where we want to take our business. Now people have got, actually, I think they've probably got less time, but they're using their time differently and realizing that yeah, it's a matter of survival, and it's a great opportunity to make sure you do survive.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point. When times are easy and good and everyone's making money, decisions don't get made. But someone once told me there's nothing that focuses your mind like a bullet, a gun to your head with a bullet in it. And Derek, what advice or encouragement would you give to the accountants and the leaders listening to take advantage of what's going on right now?
I think just two things. One, to recognise that they're not alone in this. It's an across the piece thing. No, people haven't experienced it before. I mean, I've led firms through a couple of recessions, but nothing of this magnitude. And try and learn from it and to remain positive. I think the other thing is just recognise, if you are in a leadership role, that you are the role model. You go looking like a misery and saying, you know, the tunnel, the light has gone out, and you know, forget your youngsters; they're not going to follow you. You know, you've got to try and stay upbeat if you can in times that are very challenging. But with some, you know, we're all, well, this group have all got food on the table. Come on, you know, we're not exactly struggling. Probably got 2 cars on the drive, etc. Yeah. We are very fortunate, and we can help others.
Yeah, there is lots to be grateful and appreciative for in these terms. I get that. Thank you. Martin, final words of encouragement from you to the accountants and leaders watching and listening.
I think Derek just made a great point there on perspective. You know, this has not been a world war. Where, you know, the 4.5 years are uncertain. You know, this has been a period where we've had to stay at home and innovate to a far greater degree. And my mind thinks about messaging and thinks about firms who have called themselves chartered accountants and business advisors since the 1990s. And you have always said there was no time to look at things like that. There are more pressing issues, greater deadlines to meet, and so on. And now is the time for me for firms to be very clear about who they are to their clients and to businesses as a whole. And this is a great time for them to be very clear of their messaging in terms of the outcomes in people's lives that are created, whether they give their clients their Sundays back, or whether they enable the dream home to be purchased, or put you back in control of your profits, or whatever it happens to be. I think if firms come out of this period now, where they've had time to reflect, where they've had time to consult, with the same messaging that they went in with, and it isn't even sharpened or rethought, I don't think it was ever about time. I think it was about hunger. And I think the future belongs to the hungry firms. The hungry firms, the proactive firms, the firms who have a real heart of a teacher, want to serve business owners to thrive. That's for those firms, I think there's never been a brighter time.
Anton, I'm coming to you in just a moment, but let me just briefly say that the marketers amongst us would say that attention is currency. The leaders amongst us would tell us that people and relationships are currency. But for me, the key currency throughout this is relevance. How relevant are firms going forward to solve the problems that are coming up? So that's my 2 penny. With Anton, let's give the last word to you. What advice and encouragement would you give to the leaders and accountants listening to send them on their way at the end of this debate?
I mean, for me, quite simply, if you've not been clear about what you stand for and the values that are the foundation of your organization, you don't figure this out, you missed your chance. So who are you? What do you stand for? Your people are the foundation of your success. You fail to give that attention just now and the care and love that's needed, again, another missed opportunity. But the other thing that our clients depend on us for is to be truth tellers. Unpalatable sometimes, difficult. This is the day of courageous conversations. I know if our advice is to survive, we need to move our advice to thrive, because we need to have difficult conversations about the resilience of their business model, the nature of their business model. And if they've got to change, say what needs to be said. We are the bearers of truth here, and we're also beacons of hope for them. And I think that if we can have authentic enthusiasm and optimism and hope that's not superficial, it is contagious with our clients as well. Alongside truth, we may just move.
Well, what inspiring words to finish on. Thank you so much for that, Anton. And thank you everyone for contributing today, for sharing some of your time. I'm sure you've got a Zoom call at the top of the hour, which is in 5 minutes time, but I respect the way you've kept everything brief, but punchy and on point. So on behalf of the accounting community, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts today. And I'm going to stop recording now.